we're unpacking the story of Interstate H3 in Hawaii. It's a ribbon of concrete that is, all at once, one of America's greatest engineering feats and, well, one of its most controversial highways ever built. At its core, you gotta understand, this was a strategic military project. It was born right after Hawaii became a state, and the whole point was to connect the Navy at Pearl Harbor with the Marine Corps base on the other side of the island. Simple as that. And the way they built it, it was just incredible. A total marvel. We're talking about pushing the absolute limits of civil engineering with these super sophisticated tunnels bored straight through a mountain and soaring bridges that look like they're floating above the valley. But if it was so amazing, why did it ignite a battle that lasted for almost 40 years? It was a fight that pitted federal power against local culture, and the idea of progress against the need for preservation. Okay, so let's dive in. We have to go all the way back to the beginning, to the original vision that put Interstate H3 on the map in the first place. So picture this. The ink is barely dry on Hawaii's statehood. It's 1960. And an act of Congress brings the new state into the national highway system. The plan looked pretty straightforward. Use a ton of federal money, we're talking 90% of the total cost, to build this vital defense link right across the Ko'olau mountain range. But this project, which was really dreamed up during the Cold War, was about to run head-on into the brand new environmental and cultural awakening that was sweeping across America in the 60s and 70s. The first path they chose cut directly through Moanalua Valley. Now, this wasn't just any valley. It was a sacred place, home to ancient sites like the Pohaku Kaluahine, a stone covered in petroglyphs that stood right in the highway's path. And this is where a powerful new law came into play, Section 4F. Think of it as a legal stop sign. It basically said, hey, you can't just plow a highway through a historic site if there's any other reasonable way to go around it. So, a group called the Stop H3 Association took them to court, and in 1972, a judge actually agreed with them and issued an injunction that stopped the project cold, right after the valley was officially named a National Historic Place. But the fight was far from over. I mean, not by a long shot. With the first route blocked, the state just picked a new valley, and the battle lines had to be completely redrawn. So, after the courts officially killed the Moanola route, the state shifted the highway to the next valley over, North Halawa. But guess what? This just opened up a whole new can of worms, from worries about radio interference from a Coast Guard station to brand new legal fights over cutting through Parkland. And this slide right here, it perfectly captures how deeply divided the community was. You had one side arguing for a vital military link, thousands of jobs, and less traffic. And then you had the other side, who saw the desecration of sacred sites, the threat of urban sprawl, and $1 billion that could be spent on so many other things. This stalemate just dragged on for years, with court after court blocking construction. By 1985, the whole project was on the verge of collapse. The federal government laid down an ultimatum. Get this thing started by September 1986, or all that money, it's gone. For good. So, with the legal options pretty much exhausted, and the clock ticking down, the battle shifted from the courtroom to the halls of Congress. And this is where Senator Daniel Kaneohe, a real heavyweight for Hawaii and Washington, D.C., made a bold and really controversial political move. It was completely unprecedented. He attached this special provision called a rider to a must-pass defense bill. What did it do? Well, it basically just wiped away more than a decade of court rulings. It said, you know all those environmental laws, including Section 4F, that have been blocking this project? Yeah, they don't apply to H3 anymore. And just like that, the legal fight was over. The bulldozers got the green light. So with the legal path totally cleared, crews finally began building this engineering masterpiece. But even as they were pouring the concrete, the cultural conflict was just getting more intense. And let's just talk about the price tag for a second. The final cost was $1.3 billion. That works out to roughly $80 million per mile, making it one of the most expensive stretches of road ever built in human history. But the engineering itself was just a triumph of precision. I mean, can you imagine digging a tunnel from opposite sides of a mountain and having them meet in the middle with less than an inch of error? The viaducts were built in segments so they could soar over the valley on fewer piers, minimizing the footprint on the land below. They even dug a smaller scout tunnel first to map the geology to avoid any expensive surprises. And my favorite part, on soft, marshy ground, They used massive, ultra-light polystyrene blocks, basically giant pieces of styrofoam, as fill to keep the road from sinking. Absolutely brilliant stuff. Yet, while the engineering was a model of precision, a huge storm was brewing over the project's archaeological work. One insider described it as being done in an atmosphere of fear and intimidation. That insider was an anthropologist from the Bishop Museum named Barry Nakamura. He blew the whistle, accusing the museum of deliberately hiding the discovery of sacred sites, including a rare women's temple, the Hele Opapa, all to keep this billion-dollar project on schedule. For his honesty, he was fired. That act triggered massive protests and even an occupation of the valley by native Hawaiian groups. On December 12, 1997, after 37 years of planning, protests, and politics, the H3 freeway finally opened to traffic. But its story and the long process of healing was really just beginning. You know, the opening day itself was such a study in contrasts. While officials were holding their big ceremony, protesters were still being arrested nearby. But in a really powerful moment, a native Hawaiian group performed an oli, a traditional chant. It wasn't to celebrate the road, it was to try and reconcile the spiritual damage done to the land. And that moment started a long process of mitigation, eventually leading to an $11 million fund and a formal plan to restore and protect the cultural sites that remain. So the H3 freeway stands today as both a vital piece of infrastructure for thousands of people and a permanent scar on the landscape. And it forces us to ask this really difficult question, one that resonates far beyond this one valley. When progress and preservation collide, what is the true cost? And who ultimately has to pay it?